Catherine Keane, welcome to Insiders and thanks for coming in.
Good to be with you.
And congratulations on your appointment to the portfolio. I think you are the first woman to occupy the infrastructure portfolio in government or opposition.
I think so. I haven't gone back and checked, but I think so. It's a great portfolio to have.
Congratulations on the landmark. Now, Anthony Albanese told us on Friday morning that we needed to follow the play of Labor's strategy on the tax cuts. So for the benefit of anyone who might have dropped the ball over the course of that play, can you explain to us how over the course of a fortnight you got from the position of saying that it was economically irresponsible to pass that third tranche of tax cuts to voting for it holus bolus in the Senate?
Well, basically, we always said we wanted to support stage one of the tax cuts. We thought it was important to get money to low and middle income earners quickly. We then said we supported stage two, and in fact we said it needed to be brought forward because the economy is flatlining, wages are stagnant, consumption has gone down, productivity is really sluggish, and the economy, frankly, is in trouble. We thought we needed to bring that money forward. We then said, stage three does not come in until 24-25. We don't need to talk about this now. We don't know what the economy is going to be like. Let's defer that discussion until later on. Now, the government refused to do that. They said, no, we want it's all or nothing. So we thought it was important to make sure we got money into people's pockets. But clearly, we remain concerned about stage three, particularly given, 5 years from now, we do not know what the economic circumstances are going to be. The government's claiming that somehow or other they're magically going to find $19 billion in that year that they start to kick in and not cut any services. Now, that's just a nonsense and we remain concerned about that. But it's too early to even discuss those. The government needs to act now to actually put stimulus into the economy. We also said they need to bring infrastructure projects forward.
Sure, OK, we'll get to infrastructure in a second, but you've let the door open to take a new policy to the next election to unpick that third tranche of the tax cuts. But I mean, is that really realistic to see? Do you actually see yourself potentially going to the next election with a policy to raise taxes?
So what we've said is it's too early to talk about those now. These are tax cuts that come in 24-25. We don't know what the economy will be doing. We don't know what the fiscal circumstances will be. All political parties, the Liberals will have policies at the next election. We'll have policies at the next election. That's what we've said, and we're going to, we're 3 years away from an election. We've just lost one.
So you think you could go to an election saying we're going to increase taxes?
It's too early even for us to have that discussion. It's 3 years away. That's what we've said, and that's consistently what we did this week. We thought it was too early. We tried through second reading amendments to carve that stage three out. We weren't successful at that. We're not going to stand in the way of getting money into low-income earners' pockets straight away, but we'll have a raft of policies to bring to the next election.
Why is Labor so spooked about it this time round? Because, I mean, this time last year we had exactly the same discussion, right, with the government's first wave of personal income tax cuts. Back then, you did exactly the same thing, tried to split the legislation, and then you maintained your opposition to it all the way down to the wire, and it was passed by crossbenchers in the Senate. Why did you buckle this time around?
Well, I don't think we buckled. I think we tried as hard as we could to separate that stage out. And as I said, we didn't want to stand in the way of actually getting money into people's pockets today. We thought that was important. We think the government, the government is the only people in the country who seem to be saying there is nothing wrong with the economy. When you've got the Reserve Bank governor giving the warnings that he is giving, saying, he has run to the limits of monetary policy. It's now up to the government now to do some heavy lifting. The government's only proposal is these stage one tax cuts that come into effect now. It's not brought stage two forward. They don't come into effect until 2022.
But you remain of the view that they should.
They should.
That still remains your view?
Part of them absolutely should, because the economy needs stimulus now. And that's the problem. The government doesn't seem to have a plan. It's in denial that the economy is in trouble. We've got interest rates 3 times lower than they were in the global financial crisis. What does that say about the economy that the Reserve Bank has gone to that position? Now, 12 times the Reserve Bank governor has said there needs stimulus in the economy, particularly in the area of infrastructure, and that he's reached literally the limit of monetary policy.
So the Treasurer has said, well, look, we've passed these tax cuts, that's a huge stimulus into the economy, but you remain of the view that they need to do more.
Yeah, what's their plan now?
And the RBA says, well, bring forward infrastructure, and we'll get to that in a second. But What about, I mean, you're in support of an adjustment to deeming rates.
Yep,
Sure.
sure.
And what about New Start? I mean, I thought the other day that Jim Chalmers, the Shadow Treasurer, kind of ruled that out. He said that Labor's election policy of doing a review of New Start was off the table now. What's your current thinking about New Start?
Well, I don't think there's any politician in the country, and certainly no Labor politician, that thinks the rate of New Start is okay, that it is a livable income. It simply is not. We obviously went to the election saying we wanted to review it. We lost the election. We're 3 years away again from another election and being able to do something about it. People in New Start, there was a reason that Anthony Albanese asked a question in question time this week, our first question time, of the Prime Minister. Do you think it might be a good idea to put money into the pockets of people on welfare payments, New Start payments, because that will also stimulate the economy? And the Prime Minister just flat batted that.
Right,
There's
so
a
even
reason
though
we
you're
raised the issue.
So you're not in a position to review it because you're not the government, but you nonetheless support.
We still believe very
increase.
firmly that it's too low. I don't think I don't think there's a politician in the country who could say that they could live on New Start. I mean, frankly, it is too low. The government's basically just pretending that there's no issue here, and we do think that we would have reviewed it in government. We wouldn't have been reviewing it to reduce it, frankly.
Right. Okay. So let's have a look at infrastructure now, because the RBA governor this week spelled out quite explicitly a proposal for the government to borrow and build right now. And do you agree that that's what the government should be doing?
Well, the government has a whole raft of infrastructure projects, but they're on the never. And Anthony used the example this week of Linkfield Road, which is a road between the seats of Dixon and Petrie. The first dollar that flows for that road is not till 2026. About 30% of all of the infrastructure spending, only 30% of the infrastructure spending the government claims it's going to do is going to happen over the next 4 years. Most of the projects, including many here in my home state of Victoria, are well and truly on the never. They're, when are they going to happen? We think there are some shovel-ready projects now. Examples here, there's road projects in the southeast of Melbourne, northeast of Melbourne. There are projects, the Monash Rail, for example, shovel-ready that should be invested in now, and the government should bring those forward. That's important for lifting productivity. And it's also important for making sure we get some stimulus into the economy now as well.
Okay, so exactly how much infrastructure spending do you want to be brought forward? You say it's an urgent matter.
Yeah,
so
sure.
what
we've offered to work.
Well,
we've offered to work with the government on that. We've offered to say and have said to them, we think you need to do it. We think it's really urgent that you do look at those projects. We've got a list of projects. They've got a list of projects that they said they're going to fund. Let's get on with the job. This is a third-term government. We've got an economy that is flatlining, and here we are, them suddenly dithering around saying, oh, shall we bring a roundabout forward here or not? I mean, really, what's their plan?
All right, so the G20 in a report looking at infrastructure this week said that Australia should lift its spending by 0.35% of GDP, which would mean about $7 billion this year alone. Is that about right, do you think?
Well, again, we want to work with the government on this, but I do say, the government's made this pretty weird claim that $13 billion this year alone will be spent on infrastructure. Well, if you look at, page 44 of the budget papers, it's pretty clear that's only $6 billion that's being spent on infrastructure. They have, there's a bit of smoke and mirrors happening here. What we're saying is the government, there are shovel-ready projects now, particularly in some of our regions. When you look at projects along the Bruce Highway in Queensland, for example, that are shovel-ready now, we need to stimulate the economy. Their plan has been, tax cuts. Well, they've got that bit through. We thought they needed to do better on that to get money in now. And now it's time to actually look at infrastructure, and we're calling on them to do that. Happy to work with them. They've obviously, and we don't want to see the surplus jeopardised in any way, so there's obviously got to be calibrated with that, but it's really important that they bring some of these projects forward now. Right,
well, if we bring all this together, I mean, your message is pretty strong on bringing forward tax cuts, bringing forward infrastructure spending, backing an increase to New Start, backing an adjustment to deeming rates. We've got a surplus of $7 billion. Everything that we've talked about in the preceding 5 minutes adds up to more than $7 billion. You're effectively encouraging the government to go back into deficit, aren't you?
Well, what we're saying to the government is, where's your economic plan? You've got a problem with the economy. You've got, you've said the tax cuts were the most important thing to get through the parliament to bring that money in. That's now passed the parliament. What's your plan now to actually get the economy going. We've said, particularly on infrastructure, that you need to do something about that. Deeming rates, obviously the government is signalling that it's finally, since 2014 to 2015 the deeming rates haven't been lifted, the government's finally signalling that it might do something about it because pensioners are now pretty activated about this issue. Let's see what actually happens. We think there are some sensible bring forwards on infrastructure that won't affect, won't substantially affect the surplus, and that they should bring those forward.
Your colleague Ed Husick says that this is a vanity problem for the government. It doesn't want to imperil its surplus because it's so attached to it, even though the economic circumstances demand it. Is that your view?
Certainly my view is the surplus is important, but a government has to govern for the economic circumstances that it is in.
Right, and that might involve going into deficit.
This government, we again support the government to get to surplus, but it might mean recalibrating some of your things, particularly bringing infrastructure forward to stimulate the economy. You can't ignore actually what's happening with the economy at the moment, and the government so far seems to be pretending that wages aren't stagnant, that household consumption's gone down, that we've got very, very sluggish growth in the economy, productivity really not going as strongly as we want. They seem to be ignoring all of that, and it's time that they actually stepped up and remembered that, yep, they won the election, they're in their third term, get on with it.
And is there an argument, given the economic headwinds and the availability of cheap borrowing around the world, for increasing debt and going into deficit if that's what it takes?
I think that both parties are committed to getting the budget back into surplus, and I think given the government's that what they are saying, I think it is possible to actually bring forward some of those infrastructure projects. It was possible to bring forward some of the tax cuts as well without getting the budget back into deficit. But the government's got to recalibrate its thinking. If it thinks that just staying status quo is going to lift our economy, then I think everybody, including the Reserve Bank Governor, are telling them very clearly that that's not going to be the case.
Just quickly, as a Victorian MP, I'm sure you're watching with interest the battle between John Setka and your party. He's taking legal action now against the party nationally. The government this week introduced a revised version of its Ensuring Integrity Bill, ironing out some of the complaints that Labor has made about it in the past. Is that starting to look like an appealing option for getting rid of John Setka?
Well, let's say there's two issues here. One is that it's, the Australian Labor Party determines who is a member and who won't be. And Anthony has been very clear that he wants John Sekta's membership revoked. And that'll be a matter for our National Executive on July 15 to determine, and I would expect that that's exactly what's going to happen. You've then got this anti-union, constant rhetoric from the government. I mean, let's be honest, the government hates unions. They don't want them in our system. They don't see the important and valuable role they play in workplace health and safety. They don't see the incredibly valuable role they play in negotiating great productivity outcomes in workplaces across this country, nor the protective role that they play. I see it in my community every day. We had 2 deaths, horrible deaths in my community, where the union absolutely backed the families of those workers with financial support, with counselling with support, and actually coming in and making sure that they were looked after and advocating for new laws in this area. Okay, so that is what unions do. The government sees no value for that. Now, they're saying they've revised this integrity bill. I haven't had a look at it. We haven't had a discussion about it, but I doubt very much that this bill has got anything to do with integrity. It's got everything to do with the government's anti-union rhetoric.
I sense that you continue to be a no vote. Thanks very much for joining us this week, Catherine.
Really good to be with you, Annabel.